This station is now the ultimate power in the universe.
And welcome, everybody. I hope I'm not muted, but I know people will tell me in the chat, but thank you very much for joining us on a special Scarif Live. I am here with my good friend from Miami. She just told me that it was a little warmer in down where she's at for the trick-or-treaters. How are you, Danny?
Good. I'm doing good, Ro. It's good to see you again. Yeah, it's a chilly 77 degrees here. I'm in Central Florida for Halloween, so I don't want to rub it in.
Nice.
I know it's a little cooler where you are. Yes.
And I think my dyslexia just kicked in. I called you Danny because I think I was texting Danny from Comics and Cosmetics.
Yes, I know Danny very well. Yes.
Yeah. But Andy, good to see you. And it has been a long time since we've seen each other. And I hope you don't take too long for our next show. But it's always wonderful to see friends on the show.
It is. I think the last time that we hung out virtually was also talking about spooky things, which was the Werewolf by Night, right?
Yeah. And I know we're going to talk about some more spooky things, but I know they announced the Werewolf by Night version in color. I don't know. Did you get a chance to see that in color?
I haven't yet, and I don't know if I want to because it was so effective in black and white with just the little pops of color. I don't know. I'll have to think about it.
Yeah. I've thought about it, and I'm not going to watch it because you're right. I think black and white version was just perfect.
It was tonally and like visually. I thought it was fantastic with those little pops of red here and there. And I don't know if I want to see it. Maybe to appreciate the costumes,
Sure. Yeah. Actually, that's a great idea. Just to kind of get a little visuals of the costume. Ubaldo says he doesn't like it in color, and that's interesting.
Wasn't as good in color. Interesting.
Yeah, but there's something about black and white, obviously, that conveys a very different feeling to movies and shows and stuff like that. And seeing that project in black and white, I think I might not want to ruin it watching it in color. It's almost like pulling the curtains back. But I think I'll keep my mental image of that show in black and white. What do you think?
Likewise. And, it's interesting that you say that because I know one of the things, not to get ahead of ourselves, one of the things you want to talk about in this podcast is, the Flaniverse, and part of that is Haunting of Bly Manor, which has an episode entirely in black and white. And the director did it that way specifically as an homage to the early days of horror, the Universal monsters. And it's a widely debated topic on Reddit and places like that, whether that was a good move to make that one standalone episode in black and white. And one of the reasons people cite is that the costume director did incredibly intricate 18th century costumes for the entire episode, and we didn't get to see any of it. We just saw just the shadows and black, like it was all colors and all beautiful. She did release some photos on her Instagram of the and you didn't get to see any of it because it was all in black and white. So it's debatable.
Yeah. That's I always, you do think about all the people behind the scenes that do so much incredible work, especially with the costumes on shows like that. And you do want to be able to appreciate it, but I'm kind of on the fence about stuff like that because I think the video as well as the costumes might give you a different feeling if you see it in color than in black and white. But yeah, that's a good one. I wonder what the chat thinks about the costumes in color versus black and white. But yeah, there's a couple of people that are chiming in. Absolutely. So what kind of scary things are you watching these days?
So I actually I've been making my way through the Final Destination franchise, which
Okay.
I'm kind of revisiting it because I watched it, when it came out originally, and then, as the franchise went on, I don't think I actually saw the last one, but I from through fandom osmosis online, I get the gist of what happened and all these fan theories about who Tony Todd's character is, and
Hmm.
they held up pretty well. I think that there's a whole debate about that whole franchise because no one survives it. No, like that's the death wins every single all five. I don't think anyone escapes it. I think maybe some people escape it in five, but if they're gonna make more, who knows? They do that whole thing where like they bring back characters from previous films and the
Hmm.
sequels to kill them off in the sequel. So you think they made it, but they didn't make it. So it's kind of a bleak dystopian kind of
Yeah.
franchise. When it didn't occur to me when I was watching it, the first time around when I was in college. But this time around, I was like, this is bleak. Nobody makes it out of these.
That's too funny. I have not seen any of the Final Destination movies.
But you kind of get the idea what they're about, right?
Yeah,
You cheat
yeah, I
death
think
and
you're right. You cheat death, but death seems to always find you.
yeah, yeah, and it's a whole thing, like, there's a character who might be Death I don't wanna spoil it for you. There's a character who might actually be Death, like, meddling and
Oh, okay.
giving the characters wrong information. It's this whole conspiracy theory online online
Yeah,
about why this is and why we have 5 films of people never escaping their
their
destiny and just
destiny.
great
Yeah,
conversations about that, so interesting
that's
stuff.
cool. That's
Yeah.
cool. And, is that, what were some of the movies that you grew up with when it comes to scary movies?
Oh my gosh. I have been a horror fan since I was a really, really young child. I remember watching Poltergeist, I
Mm,
think maybe on TV, but I was like little, and I remember my mother feeling like I shouldn't be watching Poltergeist because it was too scary.
yeah,
But it was like it was a little girl in it. So I was like, oh, okay. So she was kind of like, my mom was a big horror fan too. So, I guess it was kind of demystified for me very early on. I started reading Stephen King in like the fourth grade. Probably not age appropriate, and I was reading like horror and things and watching horror all, and then I remember like when I was 10 or 11 I started watching the Nightmare on Elm Street films, which I thought were incredible. They just blew my
yes.
mind. This concept that what could happen to you in your dream could happen in real life and that people
That was
could
scary.
yes, it was terrifying, but like I don't know, I didn't find it traumatic. I found it kind of exhilarating in the sense that, like, Stephen King, in his book on horror, he describes horror as a roller coaster ride. I think I've talked about this on your show before, but basically he says, like, horror provides this very safe environment for you
Yes.
to explore these scary ideas and feelings and confront and sit with that fear and terror and dread and all these things we don't normally let ourselves feel in real life, in like
Yeah,
normal everyday, hopefully,
sure.
and those aren't things that you really are used to. But in horror, you have this safe context that you can explore that in, and then at the end, you go home and you're fine. It's kind of the roller coaster is it's the same thing. Like you ride this roller coaster, and you know that at the end of that 2.5 minutes, after you've screamed your head off and you dropped, dropped 150 feet in the air and all this other stuff. It's a very contained experience, and it lets you feel things that you would normally not be comfortable sitting with in your day-to-day life in a safe context.
Yeah, that's interesting because I totally and the chat is kind of chiming in too. I totally understand the whole aspect of being scared on a roller coaster. But I think I might be too much of a control freak where I can't control like once you're on a roller coaster, you're there till the end.
Yeah, you're
And
stuck.
yeah, you're stuck. So I remember going to and this is so silly. I think when I was younger, I went to Disneyland, and the a girlfriend I had at the time took me on this ride. I didn't know what it was. It was Space Mountain, And she's like, well, you like Star Wars, so it's got space in it. And I'm like, all right, whatever. Let's see what it's all about. But I had no idea it was a roller coaster,
Yeah.
and I absolutely hated it.
Oh, wow. Wow, that's
I was
interesting.
not,
Yeah.
yeah, not into roller coaster at all.
It's in the
And
dark
then,
too. Yeah,
yeah, it's
it's
in the
that.
dark and you got the lights going, and I just don't like that feeling of being flung across a room without that control. And recently, not too recently, when my son was like maybe 6 years old, or maybe even younger, I mean, we went to Disneyland, Disney World, actually, in Florida, in Orlando, and we
I was
did
just
what
there a
it's
couple days ago. I was just there.
yeah, yeah. What's that ride where you name some of the famous roller coasters?
So they have the Space Mountain
The
is a
one
big
with the
one.
Yeah, the one with the Yeti, you go all the way up and then you go
Oh,
down
yeah,
and then the
Expedition
track is
Everest and
on.
Animal Kingdom. Yeah, Animal
Yes,
Kingdom and
yeah,
Expedition Everest. I love that one.
yeah.
That one's great.
And my wife is okay with roller coasters. I am not, and I decided to put on a brave face for my son because I didn't know if he was going to be into it. And he was into it for like half a second until he realized that he just did not like it. And he was
Oh,
young, but I remember going straight up on the track, and then you go into this like fake mountain, but then
yeah.
you come up out of the top, and then I looked over and I can see the curvature of the earth, and I knew it was bad news.
It's a good time though. Yeah, my dad when I was younger, he used to white knuckle his way through them for me too, but now he like respects them from afar. And I send pictures
Right.
of because my son and I go to theme parks all the time, and I send him the scary roller coaster photos, and he's always like, I'm just sweating just looking at it. Like, but I'm a fan. I mean, maybe there's a connection there between liking horror and liking roller coasters, because for sure I'm a big fan of both. So
Yeah, that I wanted to kind of touch a little bit about that. And you had mentioned the fact that horror, when it comes to being scared, especially with movies, there's a certain, I don't know, there's a certain psychology behind that. Um, you know, for me growing up, some of the movies that I really enjoyed, and because of the scare factor, were like Friday the 13th,
yeah, yeah.
the Halloween movies, Michael
Me too.
Myers,
Yeah.
Freddy Krueger, all that stuff that gives you this the jump scares every so often. I found that those little moments exhilarating. And then it's funny because you are scared, you jump for a while, but then you laugh. You have that like
Yeah.
weird nervous
The
laugh.
nervous laughter. Yeah.
And I wanted to touch a little bit about that. What do you think that is? The after scared nervous laugh.
Yeah, that's a really interesting, because I'm actually not a fan of jump scares. And it's not I actually think jump scares is a misnomer. I have these like complicated, elaborate feelings about about these, because I don't think jump scares are really scary. I think they're more like they trigger a startle reflex.
Okay. Yeah.
They're not necessarily like fear. I'll give you a great example is here in Central Florida at Universal Studios. We have every year at Universal Studios, they have Halloween Horror Nights, which is they sort of dress up part of the park, and they have scare actors. So they hire people, usually they're Universal Studios employees, but sometimes they just hire extra people, and they dress up as like psycho people or people with
Hmm.
chainsaws or monsters. And you're walking along the park. It's really cool. You get to see all these haunted houses. They set up like 10 haunted houses. And so you're walking through the park, and there's just people with fake chainsaws jumping out from behind a garbage can screaming at you in your face, and you're like, "Bro, I'm just trying to have a Slurpee. Can I just like like it's continual. And then you go to the haunted houses, and it's more people jumping out and screaming at you in your face. And it's
Yeah.
like the jump scare after jump scare. And I find that very dysregulating. Like it makes me very like out of sorts. And it doesn't
Yeah.
scare me. It doesn't like I'm not afraid of that person, but I just find it very dysregulating. So I don't enjoy that. I don't think it's fun. I don't think I
Yeah.
don't know, like, it's not scary, it's just annoying, like,
Yeah. That's
you know,
funny.
I don't mind, like, in some instances, but Haunting of Hill House, there's an episode 8, there's a very famous jump scare that they had montages of people reacting to and things like that when it first came out.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember the scene I'm referring to where she jumps out from between her sisters in the episode of Haunting of Hill House where they're
You
driving and
know,
they're arguing
so
and she jumps out.
that is my favorite one of the bunch. I
Yes.
I think the original is still probably the best
Yeah.
one. The jump scares that I remember, anything having to do later in the series when we see the floating ghost that's
Yeah.
down the hallway. I
Yeah.
mean, those are like creepy images. I think besides jump scares, I think um creepy images really entertain me in that way.
Yeah.
There's this one shot where the little girl goes under the bed and you can see that the door starts to open and then you see like the
The
floating
floating
old
guy.
just going by. And I mean, that like is like just very disconcerting. And I love that. As far as jump scares though, it's you seem to enjoy a more elongated feeling of being frightened. Is that true? Because mine is more of a, like you said, it's more of like the startling, like, oh my god, like, oh my god.
Yeah. I think they can be used to really great effect. I saw a film, it recently came out this year. It was called No One Will Save You. It's on Hulu, I think. It's on streaming. If you can get a chance to see it, it's excellent. It has almost no dialogue. I think it has 3 lines of dialogue in the entire film. And the actress, the main lead actress, it's all through expressions and like stunts and her looks and her posture and everything. It's an incredible performance. I think her name is Caitlin Dever, and
Hmm.
she's just a really she just puts in. I've never really seen a performance in horror like this. It's literally an hour and a half with no dialogue, and
Wow.
there are scenes in that where she's being chased by I won't give it. She's being chased by someone in the film, and there are scenes of jump scares that are used to really good effect. So I think that jump scares can be used to really good effect. I just think that like I'll tell you an example of one that I'm just like, whatever. It's like it's white noise at this point. I've seen so many of them. It's the fake out jump scare. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah,
Like when
right, sure.
in a film where like there's a jump scare and it's just like a jack in the box or a cat knocks something over and you think, that kind of thing. It is what it is.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, those are great. I think yeah, some of the like the poltergeist one that you mentioned, I saw that already as a like an older person. I don't know, the ones that I probably shouldn't have watched as a kid, um, were probably not even the Halloweens or stuff like that, because my friend and I were really into behind the scenes and we did our own blood effects.
Yeah.
So all that stuff is like, we know how they do it because we've been like, you do it in grammar school and high school growing up, doing
Yeah.
all these little movies. But I think one of the series of movies that I watched that I probably shouldn't have at that time was the Faces of Death series. Are you
Oh, yeah,
familiar
I've
with
never
those?
seen those. Yeah, I've
Oh,
never seen those. I've I understand what you're saying. I'm familiar with what they are about and stuff. And that's the thing is like I was just about to say that I think a lot of the reasons why these films like Evil Dead was one of my favorites when I was growing up too. And just you have Michael Myers, Jaws. I know there's a big debate about whether it's a horror film and things
yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
But like scary films, they're very hyper violent. Like they're surreal. It's almost like they're so violent that they don't look real. It's
Right.
fake. It's
Mhm.
going back to the whole thing about it's fake. You can feel, oh, that's scary, dread, whatever, but at the end of the day you're going to be fine. And Carrie, I think, also is another horror film that I saw when I was really young, and
Mhm.
the original with Sissy Spacek. And so they're just so over the top with the blood and the gore, and often they get criticized, especially like the 80s and the 90s, and there was a lot of assembly line disembowelment kinds of films.
Right.
But to some degree I think that helps ground them for the viewer, that you're not watching something real. For Faces of Death though,
Right.
like that
It's
is
it's a little different.
it's too close for comfort for me.
Yeah.
It's why I can watch, the Saw films. I mean, not why I can watch, Nightmare on Elm Street rather, and the Saw films I find very unsettling because they're just torture for 2 hours, you know, and
Right.
just that's if it's a little too close for comfort, now it's getting too real for me. It
Yeah,
has to have
yeah.
that it's not
There's
safe.
a line for sure.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. I have not watched any of the Saw movies as well.
yeah.
Or what's that other weird one? The Human Centipede.
Oh, yeah.
All that.
Everything I know about that film, I learned against my will, you know?
Yeah, yeah,
It sounds very
absolutely.
silly, though. It sounds it doesn't sound scary, it just sounds gross and silly,
Yeah.
but
But it's like uh, I remember my mom used to say, goes, no, that those movies are where crazy people get ideas from. So it's like, oh, okay. I'll stay away from them. Not that I'm saying I'm
normal.
crazy. Yeah, right.
No. It's
Yeah.
funny because I go to, horror conventions sometimes. I Spooky Empire is one that comes twice a year to Orlando.
Oh, okay.
It's full of, oddities and curiosities and macabre merchandise and all kinds of stuff, and it's like the chillest, friendliest group of people you could
Yeah, I've
possibly
heard that. Yeah.
like, the horror fandom it tends to be so laid back, it tends to be super friendly, it's very diverse, it's very welcoming, it's really it's for what we are talking about, like, if you g their Final Destination has a subreddit, like, the franchise. If you
Yeah.
go on there, there's no arguing, there's just people, like, saying what they
Wow.
like about what trading
I don't know
theories.
what that's no arguing in fandom. I don't know what that's about.
I know, it's so laid back, and the people being like, "That's a really interesting theory. Thank you for posting it." Yeah, I don't agree, but I love how you put they're so like this Final Destination franchise, you know? And so like
That's funny.
it's all like that, it's a very different vibe of fandom. Maybe it's because we work out all our weird stuff through what we are watching.
Could be. Oh yeah, that's like pretty good way to therapy.
Yeah.
That's funny. We're gonna get into House of Usher. I know the chat is in there. Grave Reviews is promoting his show in my chat. But we'll definitely get into Crystal House of I'm sorry, the House of Usher, because I did want to talk about it. But let's go back in history a little bit, because I know I want to take advantage of the fact that I have you on the show, because you are replete with knowledge of old monster movies and things like that, and I think that's what attracted me to your account. And you were on the show before. We talked a little bit about that, but
Yeah.
let's go back in time a little bit and talk about some of those old vintage monster movies, the 30s and the 40s. Give me the 411 on those wonderful, wonderful old Hollywood movies.
It's if you're a fan of the behind the scenes stuff and the special effects, they're such a joy to watch because they were all practical effects then, right? Like they were just perfectly timed shots of people, working in tandem, and the makeup, the way that it was all done, to elicit certain effects and to have certain shadows, and because they were black and white, they had to
Yeah,
suggest things more than, they were very understated, and a lot of it was new. A lot of like I was just talking about this with a friend because she was dressing up as the Bride of Frankenstein for
hmm,
Halloween, and we got to sort of talking about, Elsa Lanchester, who was the actress who played her, and she, was the first scream queen. Like, women were not horror stars in the
hmm.
30s, this
That's
was
right.
not it
It
was
was
not
all
a
Boris
thing.
Karloff and Lon
Yes, yes,
Chaney. Yeah,
exactly, and, like, she kinda really took a big risk with that, because just being an actress in the 30s alone was something that was morally questionable in society, right? But
right.
to be a horror, be an object of horror, and to be this woman who wasn't I mean, she's beautiful to me, and she's beautiful to us now because we see
Sure.
her, her as this iconic figure. But at the time, there was nothing like that. There was she was the first. She really was the first to be ugly and be vulnerable in that way. And not be like conventionally beautiful and be something horrifying and evoking pity and fear, and
Mhm.
all of that was just amazing, you know. And you mentioned Boris Karloff. I mean, I know that he was very ambivalent about people associating, because he was a classically trained actor, you know.
Sure.
It happens, that happens now, right? You have people like Patrick Stewart, who's, you know, from the Royal
Yeah.
College of
Yeah.
Shakespeare, doing, you know, Star Trek, right? Which
Right.
is not saying that's a downgrade, but some people might view it. I think he doesn't view it that way, but I think a lot of people might be like, wow, you trained in Shakespeare for 30 years and you end up piloting a fake starship, you know?
Yeah, I mean, there are actors like that, and, you know, going into the Star Wars franchise, Anthony Daniels, who plays C-3PO and has played C-3PO since the beginning, was like that. He was like, "What? An American director is wanting me to do what? No,
Yeah.
I'm not gonna do that." And, you know, C-3PO is probably Anthony Daniels' most beloved character. I mean, he fell in love with the character, so it's interesting. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it happens all the time in genre. You know, like I go to a lot of conventions and I talk to a lot of actors that are, you know, genre actors, and a lot of them have that experience where they're not like, most of them, I would say the vast majority, if not almost all of them, are grateful for what fandom and what the role has brought them, but it
Sure.
was definitely not something that you don't plan a career trajectory as being, you know, Spock. That's not who
Right,
you want to be
right.
when you grow up, is being like
Sure.
this beloved sidekick on a sci-fi, you know, cult classic. That's not the kind of thing that actors train for. And I think back then, especially when this was all brand new, this is like,
Mhm.
you know, and I think we talked about this before when I was on your podcast last time, but horror made so much money at the box office. People loved it. Like all those, like James Whale, you know, Dracula, Boris Karloff, all of those, the Mummy, Creature from the Black Lagoon, you know, they made
Yes.
so much money that you can almost in a way say that those classic Universal films funded Hollywood. Like they were the
Mhm.
seed funds. That was why we have Hollywood today. We would not have it if it wasn't for the massive amounts of cash influx that those horror films, those cheap, you know, horror films with like practical effects and no name actors at the time, you know, if they had not been the big hits that they were, we might not have Hollywood today as we know it. So it's just, you know.
Yeah. You know, getting back to our black and white talk, do you think those films would have been as effective if they were in color? Like
Yeah,
Frankenstein, Dracula, like all that stuff?
you know, that's a really terrific question, because certainly there have been plenty of films in color that were incredibly effective and that were incredibly evocative and provocative and thought provoking and all of that. So it's possible. I mean, we know it's possible. You know, I just saw a 3.5 hour long film, Killers of the Flower Moon, that was incredibly evocative and just made
Mhm.
me cry a million times, and that was in full color, right? So it's definitely a possible thing. It's that wasn't what they were working with. I mean, they knew how to make the most of what they
Mhm.
were limited, their limitations, you know. They couldn't rely on CGI. They couldn't rely on advanced prosthetics. Those hadn't been invented yet. So
Yeah.
they squeezed, you know, every drop of blood from every stone that they could, you know. And that
Literally.
literally sometimes,
Yeah.
and you know, and so and the actors too, they were just bringing these theatrical stage presences to
Sure.
it was all experimental. They were all doing the best they could and the most that they could. And I don't know if that's possible today. Does that make sense? Like they don't have those constrictions. They don't have the same like extreme
Yes.
limitations. So
Right.
we
I mean,
we
the extreme limitations really is I guess the impetus of the imaginative force. How can I convey this idea without having to, you know, rely on the tools that I have or the tools that I don't have? I think the imaginative process um is more fruitful when you try to work around the problem to get to your solution in a way that isn't, you know, too easy, I guess. Because like you said, I mean, you can rely on CGI, you can rely on special effects to really, you know, show the audience, you know, the oohs and ahs. But I think, from an imagination perspective, I think if you're able to do that without the tools that maybe modern, you know, filmmaking has, you know, like they did back then, I think it's stronger, and I think that's probably why those films have survived so
Yeah.
much.
Yeah.
We talk about in our notes, we talk a little bit about programs like The Shadow, and these are dramas and horror that was they were played on the radio. How much? Let me ask you this: how much? Let's say hi to Price of Reason, who just entered. What's up, Price? Um, how much of the audience's imagination do you think plays into the effectiveness of communication of the horror genre?
I think some of it leans into that more than others. I think, certainly when we talk about horror, it's like saying romance. I mean, or
Sure.
fantasy. There's so many subgenres, and there are so many different approaches to telling story. And I think that stories within horror, I think we live in a time where a lot of really talented people, Jordan Peele, James Wan, Lee Winnell, James Blum and Blumhouse and all the wacky stuff like that Megan and all that stuff that Blumhouse
Right.
is doing. Blumhouse is a studio that's taking a lot of terrific chances on small properties or revamping. They got some of the rights to some of the Universal monster IPs. Now I think they're doing a Wolfman
Mhm.
adaptation and things like that. So to answer your question, I think that there are some that we live in an age where a lot of really talented directors and writers and creators are using the horror tropes that we are familiar with to tell different stories and to tell modern stories and to explore them from a psychological standpoint. I think that wasn't a priority, or that wasn't necessarily the aim for these 1930s, 1930s, 1940s horror. Hitchcock, I love what that person just said about Hitchcock, saying that what
Mhm.
you don't see is scarier than what you
Then what
do.
you do. Absolutely, yeah.
A lot of that. One terrific example recently that I saw was, the 2020 film The Invisible Man with Lee
Mhm.
Winnell, which I think was made for under $7 million. It was a tiny, tiny budget. It ended up being a massive worldwide hit, and he used invisible space to great effect in that film,
Yes.
where you had, like, scenes of, because you knew this person, this stalker, was invisible, and so he would show these empty hallways, just innocuous looking kitchens,
Sure.
a living room, an empty living room, and just using this great deal of just empty space, to
Right.
kind of make you wonder and really messed with your head. So I think that today we live in a time where creators are using those psychological angles. I think it's not that it's saying anything new. I think it's just being front and center more often than maybe it was with, like, but I don't know, then you have things like Psycho, which definitely meant to
Sure.
screw with your head, absolutely
Yeah.
meant to toy with your senses and your perception of what had happened, and all those types of things. But, then we got Texas Chainsaw Massacre, maybe not so much.
Right. And I wish
Mhm.
I wish directors would use that a little bit more. You talk about The Invisible Man, the new one. There was, and I haven't seen it, but I've seen just different clips of it. And I was kind of talking to a buddy of mine regarding the what you were saying, but the framing of that film in certain shots gives you that sense of dread, gives you that playing with your mind thing. So there's, the main character, she's off to the side, but she's down below in the frame. And then the rest of it is like an open
You're like,
shot of the kitchen. So
what's
you're
in there?
wondering, like, right, why is the director framing it like this? Is the invisible man there? So you're like visually you're scanning the room, you're scanning the shot to see if anything is moving or if you see some sort of distortion, but you're in that forever anticipatory mode that you're expecting something to happen. And I think that plays a lot with especially that film. But I really do wish that directors would kind of use that a little more. And again, going back to basics, Alan from Grave Reviews said it best, or paraphrased it best, regarding Hitchcock's, saying is that, it's scarier what you think of up here than what you're actually seeing.
Yeah,
Uh,
Hitchcock was a terrific at that. I mean, he really, he really perfected that whole idea, that whole concept. But ultimately, I think from the beginning of horror to modern day, it's really a conversation between you and the director, right? Because you're like,
Yes.
what they're using everything on screen to have this dialogue with you, to engage with you and get you sucked into this world and playing with your emotions that way. So I think that's you can see that
Sure.
evidence of that from Nosferatu, which I rewatched that recently, which it really is a very interesting film even 100 years later. I know it's cut up and it's not in perfect, physical form, the Nosferatu, the actual physical
Film,
film.
right.
They've had to cut it together and do all kinds of stuff with it. But regardless, I've seen a couple of versions of it, and it's the director's still doing the same thing, shooting things from a certain angle, close-ups, expressions that they're capturing, things that they're it's just all a way of engaging with the viewer. And I think you see that from very, very early on to all the different ways that people do it. It's very interesting. So
Yeah, Nosferatu is one of those movies that I think I saw when I was 9 years old, and it freaked the hell out of me. I
it
mean,
is
the
scary.
ears, the shadows, his long fingers, his head.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
was like freaked out as a little kid.
Yeah, it's such a fun
Absolutely.
story too because of the fact that it's basically Dracula, but at the time, Bram Stoker's estate had not gone on long enough for copyright to
Hmm.
expire, so they were basically committing, like the reason why physical copies don't exist, intact physical copies don't exist anymore, and a bunch of stuff has been destroyed from it, is because they were ordered like, they changed a few things around, and they thought they could, like, make a ripoff of Dracula. Nobody
Yeah, right.
noticed. People noticed, and they were ordered to destroy everything, but obviously not everything did get destroyed. That's why we still have some surviving footage of it and what have you, but a bunch of it has been destroyed. Like, we don't know what the original score sounded like. It's been
Hmm.
destroyed. Things like little
Yeah,
things like that because of so that's a fun little, like,
fun
early
little fact.
Hollywood drama.
Sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Hollywood
Wow.
brouhaha, you could say,
Yeah, interesting, interesting. I'm gonna pose a question to you, Andy, and the chat. You had mentioned that the horror genre or the scary movies that we're talking about, do you guys feel like this genre is probably the most intimate genre there is between an audience and the filmmaker? What do you guys think in the chat? Um, filmmaking is as they say on the Mandalorian show, it's a very complicated profession. But it is, when a director gets together with a writer, script writer, and the rest of their creative team, I think it's an exhilarating process to be able to put together something that doesn't exist, but a concept that is communicated through the masses through cinema. The word cinema is often thrown around in a lackadaisical way, but there are certain pure aspects of cinema which I think really horror really takes advantage of. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think it's all about the story. It's really all about the story that the film is trying to tell, and that's what we were talking about earlier. That we're living in a time where people are really using horror tropes and horror conventions to tell really interesting stories. Because the Invisible Man. This is
Hmm.
100-year-old. Literally, I think it's 80 or 90 years old. It's almost a century old. This story, this original film, and the new film is about gaslighting. It's about psychological abuse and the way that people in domestic violence situations aren't believed,
Hmm.
especially if the partner has a lot of money or a lot of power, that people are often treated as being not being believed, and being invited to not believe their own memory and their own experiences and things like that. So
Sure.
yeah, it really does. It is telling a bunch of different stories now, which is really exciting. I don't like the phrase elevated horror because it implies that previous
Right.
horror wasn't
Was
elevate or was, beneath things. I don't
beneath.
think that's
Right.
true. The great horror stories have been told for over a century now, but
Sure.
but it's a different avenue, I think, that they're going with.
Maybe they're comparing it to the Abbott and Costello Meet the Monsters situation, but
Those are fun
those are
too.
fun movies too. So
I
no
think
hate
people think like
there.
there was that whole like period of time where we had Final Destination, we had Scream, we had a few franchises come out, and then they had a bunch of copycats and um like standalone and others. And then they had the Scary Movie franchise, which made fun of all of these tropes. And I think that we got a sense there in the early aughts, I guess, where horror was very tropey and cheesy. And
Hmm.
but like it's actually really difficult to find good examples of, like, there's way more examples of really interesting horror
Yeah,
horror, like Midsummer and and The Witch and all these other there's a bunch of like different stuff being told now. That's
sure.
it's not that assembly line disembowelment that people get. That might have been at a certain point in time, that might have been a fad for a couple of years, but it was never the norm, is what I'm trying to say.
Right, right. Yeah, and even the films that might seem like they are schlocky and goofy to begin with, like how many Michael Myers, Friday the 13th movies there are there? Jason, et cetera, et cetera. I think they survive for a reason. Up until, I don't know, Jason 10 goes into space, but that's another story.
Sci-fi.
Sci-fi. Well, let's that I have a feeling that's like the suits getting together and said, you know what? How can Jason be in a Star Wars movie? Let's think about how that can happen. Let's skip a little bit into the future, and I know you wanted to talk about the Flanagan movies,
The Flaniverse.
and the Flaniverse. Yeah. So let's do a little bit of a kind of a timeline. The I don't want to say the first one was the Haunting of Hill House, but I think in the grand scheme of things, when it comes to, I guess the regular approach of the films that were being released on Netflix, I think for me that was the first one that I really that my wife and I watched and we really enjoyed. I think we started watching all these haunting shows, these TV reality shows a couple of Halloweens ago. They started to come out, and we just wanted more. When we finished watching, the haunting shows, we wanted more scary stuff. And
Were
this
you
came
guys
out.
a fan of the American Horror Story franchise? Are you guys a fan of those, or the
You know
American
what?
Horror
I think I remember watching the first one, but I think at some point those jumped the shark
Story?
to some degree. Um, and I'm going to clump in this last one regarding jumping the shark, but we'll get to it in a second. Let's talk a little bit about the first one. I had posted a while ago, which you agreed, regarding the first one is still the best one.
Yeah.
The first series, what's it called? Haunting of Hill
Haunting of
House.
Hill House, yeah, which is
And
based loosely on a Shirley Jackson novel. Yeah.
yeah, so absolutely wonderful cast, and obviously, how cool is it to have these all these series with the same, for the most part, the same cast. And I love the fact that it's almost like old Hollywood, where they just kind of recycle their old their actors in different roles, and I think that's obviously done on purpose.
Yeah, for sure. So the the first the first engagement that Mike Flanagan had with Netflix was Gerald's Game, which is a film adaptation starring Carla Gugino, who played the mother
Hmm.
in Haunting of Hill House, and she's also in Bly Manor, and she's also in Fall of the House of Usher. But she played the lead character in that film, and I don't think that Netflix produced that, but they did eventually like acquire it, and that was the start of Mike Flanagan's relationship with Netflix. And so they greenlit Haunting of Hill House as a standalone limited series with 10 episodes. Is it 10? Yeah, 10 episodes. And it was a massive hit. Like, it was a sleeper hit, like
Hmm.
they put it out near Halloween. So I know Gerald's Game was in 2017, like in the fall, and almost a year later, like a year and a month later, was Haunting of Hill House. So it was from one. Gerald's Game was a big hit. They greenlit Haunting of Hill House, and and so on and so forth. So, um, It's funny you say that because a lot of the people from Haunting of Hill House actually don't come back. Like Mikhail Huisman, who plays Steve. Elizabeth Reeser was, I think she was in Gerald's Game, and she was in Haunting of Hill House, and she's never been in anything else again.
Mhm.
Victoria Pedretti and Oliver Jackson Cohen have not been back since Bly Manor. The a couple of other actors that like he does, he actually talked about this, Mike Flanagan, on his Tumblr, I think a couple of days ago,
Hmm.
because people ask him, how do you decide who comes back
Who's
and who doesn't,
right.
and why do some people never come back? Like Victoria Pedretti was the star of both Haunting of Hill House and of Bly Manor, and she hasn't been seen since. And there's been a lot of speculation and all kinds of, like people gossip and people make up stuff, and you know how
Sure.
it goes. You know how
Yeah.
fandoms do,
Yeah.
and so like, but he hasn't really talked about it. And so he was like, well, a couple of things. Sometimes it's schedules, sometimes we've tried to get somebody and they just didn't work out for that particular
Yeah, these are long
schedule.
projects, right?
They are very long projects. They take about 7 to 9 months per show to film. They take a long time to film. I think that Fall of the House of Usher did not take that long, and neither did Midnight Club, the one with the kids, the teenagers. I think those took less, but the other ones took a really long time. But he said sometimes it's schedules. We try to get somebody, they just can't, just schedules don't work out. Sometimes it's that I have all these great actors. Like he has such a great roster that he can't write a role for everybody,
Mhm.
like sometimes it just doesn't, like, I can't find a role for that person.
Sure.
And sometimes he said, like, he was really cool about it. If you're interested in this, you should look him up on Tumblr. He says he had quite a long response to this, but he says sometimes, you come out of a project and either you have no desire to work with that actor again, or the actor has no desire to work with you again. And it's not that
Mm.
it's bad blood, but it just, things come
Yeah.
to an end sometimes. Things run
Sure.
their course,
Yeah.
And he didn't name any names. He didn't say anything, but uh, that's oops. He didn't actually say anything about anybody in particular, but
Sure.
that's why he's had, this sort of roster of, obviously his wife is on everything,
Mhm.
Kate
Sure.
Siegel's and everything. Henry Thomas is pretty much
Yeah.
in everything as well.
Right.
But for the most part, I think Annabeth Gish might be another one that is in every single one. And Samantha Sloyan. So there's like a couple that are in every single film. But for the most part, you will find that his casts vary quite a lot, like
Mhm.
from one thing to the next. So it's really kind of interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, and the actors that do return, I mean, you see them in one series or show, and then they pop up back in, and then
Yeah.
it obviously they remind you of the previous show, and I'm like, oh, this is kind of cool. I love the fact that what's the actor that's in this new one, Bruce? No, what is his name? The
What did he
dad.
play?
Well,
Robert, I think his name is Robert Green. Is it
oh
the guy
my
who plays the
God,
dad? Yeah.
yeah,
I'm pretty sure it's like
Bruce
something.
Bruce Green,
Oh, so close, Robert.
yeah. Bruce Green is an amazing actor.
Yeah.
Obviously he plays.
Bruce
He's in
Greenwood,
the.
right? Bruce Greenwood.
Yeah,
There
right.
you go.
There you go.
There
There you go. Thank you, Google.
you go.
He's an amazing actor. He was the draw for me on this particular series. He's in one of the Star Treks. He's in a JFK movie with Kevin Costner. He plays, John F. Kennedy.
Yeah.
So he's such an amazing actor, and like I said, he's just wonderful in anything he's in, whether it's a small role or a large role. I
He
would.
was in Gerald's Game as well. He was also
Oh,
in
okay,
Gerald's Game. Yeah. He's
yeah.
Canadian. He's a Canadian actor. And Mike Flanagan moved after Haunting of Hill House. Haunting of Hill House was filmed in Atlanta, and then everything else has been filmed in Vancouver. So
Hmm.
he's got, like, after Haunting of Hill House, you start to see a lot of Canadian talent. And he's one of them. So
Okay, cool. Yeah, excellent. And then obviously the little boy that was in ET.
yeah, Henry Thomas.
Always,
I've
yeah,
met him. I
always.
met him.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's
interesting
cool.
guy. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's so weird to see these actors, all grown up, especially him.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's such a wonderful cast. I think it's a great cast on all the shows. Obviously, I have my favorites.
Yeah.
I have
Is
not gone back to Usher after the acid nightclub scene.
That's as far well, we got my family tapped out of that one too. They were just like,
Yeah,
"This is stupid." But,
yeah.
it's funny you like Bruce Greenwood was a draw. He was not the original actor. I don't know if you
Oh,
heard
okay.
about this,
No.
it's a little bit unpleasant, I guess. It was originally Frank Langella, and apparently some of the
Oh,
women working on the show, he was, I guess, very
touchy-feely?
disrespectful. Yes, he was disrespectful, and he just was, like, fired for sexually harassing, like, cast and crew, I think. So,
Wow.
they had to reshoot a lot of those scenes, like a lot of his scenes. So it's interesting if you watch House of Usher, um, he's not really like you can kind of see where they had to reshoot stuff, like
Mhm.
because there's a lot of that character is just talking to Carl Lumbly's
Right,
character, and a lot of it is just shots of him. So you
right.
can kind of see where they reshot, and like if you know that if you go into it knowing that he wasn't the original actor, and they got pretty far into production with Frank Langella, and I definitely think he would have brought a completely different vibe
Mhm.
to the role, like just a completely different take on the role. But,
Sure.
if you watch the show knowing you can see where things were cut and things were reshot and things like that. It really there's a scene in episode 1 or 2, I think it was episode 1, where, they had to reshoot it with the press outside. They're, like,
Yes.
clamoring to take photos of him, and
Yeah,
they had to reshoot that because he's in it, and you
yeah.
can see there's, like, 5 people being made to look like 30,
Right.
These really funny little so just like I'm sorry if I've ruined the show for anyone who hasn't watched it yet, but now you will be on the lookout, being like, "Oh, you can tell that
Yeah,
that
you
wasn't,"
can tell, yeah. It's funny that you mentioned that scene with the photographers 'cause, as a photographer, you know what bothers me when I see other photographers in movies and shows is how wrong they hold the cameras.
And the huge
Yeah.
lenses for close-ups and
Well,
stuff.
in that particular scene, those gray lenses, they're big. They're G series Sony lenses, but for some reason, the photographers in the scene have them upside down.
Oh,
And I
no.
yeah, and I'm like,
Oh,
"Why?
no.
Can somebody please hire a consultant, please?"
Doesn't anybody take photos? Oh my god,
Yeah,
that's
it's
crazy.
too
I didn't
funny.
know that. That is really funny. Yeah,
Yeah.
my family tapped out at that scene. And here's the thing, like what I really loved about what I love, and I actually like a lot of Mike Flanagan's work early on. I really loved Doctor Sleep, which is a film that was the
Mhm.
sequel to The Shining, and
Yeah.
he really had an impossible task with that because he was trying
Yeah.
to make a sequel to a film and a book, and the book and the film ended in completely different ways. With the Kubrick version of The Shining, and there was that whole drama with Kubrick and Stephen King. They didn't like the way that, that Stephen King didn't like the way that Stanley Kubrick adapted the film to the screen, and
Right.
it was a very, a lot of The Shining and the sequel take place inside someone's head. So how do you bring that to the screen? Well, Stanley
Sure.
Kubrick offered, we have the film The Shining, which is this huge, cult classic. But Stephen King was famously not happy with it. So Mike Flanagan had this task of writing and directing this sequel that was both a good sequel to the book and to the Kubrick film. And he did pull that off, which I thought was incredible. And Haunting of Hill House I thought was fascinating because it posed the question, what happens after the credits roll? Like the family escapes the
Mhm.
haunted house, and then what happens? And like they have that like in The Omen and Amityville Horror and all these like the final shots are them like, oh, like running away from,
Yeah.
and like everybody's kind of like limping away, and then the credits roll. And so Haunting of Hill House is what happens to that family after the credits roll and what that kind of trauma does. And it uses horror and ghost as this metaphor for other things that might haunt you, like,
Absolutely.
childhood trauma and
Yeah.
family betrayals and all this other stuff. I thought that was such an original narrative to go with, and the way that the juxtaposition of the children's experiences with the adult experiences, I just thought it was really, really interesting. And then what happened was, from my understanding, is that Mike Flanagan at that point did not have a long-term deal with Netflix. So Haunting of Hill House was a huge hit, and Netflix offered him a 3-year contract. And to sweeten the pot, they said they were going to finance Midnight Mass. But to get him on board, they were like, well, but you got to do something for us because Haunting of Hill House was a huge hit. We want you to make a sequel. And at that point, it was funny because part of the reason that Haunting of Hill House was not submitted for any Emmys was because they didn't know at that point if it was going to be like a limited series or an anthology series. They didn't really know. That was exact
They didn't
period
know which peg to put them in.
they couldn't submit them for anything. And so, which is a shame because there's that incredible episode 6, which has something like 4 takes, and one of them is 22 minutes long. And it's like they do flashbacks within the one take. It's like an incredible scene. And but yeah, so to sweeten the pot, they gave him Midnight Mass, but he had to give them Bly Manor. And so he was barely involved in Bly Manor. Like he just wrote the first episode, he directed it, and then he wrote a treatment for the rest of the series, and then he took off to do Dr. Sleep. And I think that's why there is such a sharp contrast in between Haunting of Hill House and Bly Manor. I know a lot of people who love Bly Manor. Did you like it? Did you enjoy Bly Manor?
You know, I liked it up until the halfway point. After that, it was. So here's one thing that bothers me when I watch shows, any show, whether it's whatever, when the character motivations don't make sense to me, that's when I tune out. So I think somewhere in there, the characters in I'm sorry, you're talking about Bly Manor or Midnight Mass?
Yeah, well, Midnight. It's funny because Midnight Mass is what Mike Flanagan has called it his most personal project. He's called it it's a deeply personal. He said he's felt very naked putting it out there, and he's felt it's an incredibly intimate piece of writing for him, which is so funny to me because I think it is the most generic, basic, like it says nothing about, like, it says this really controversial idea that sometimes evangelical people are hypocritical and do bad things. Wow. Wow, that is brand new information, you know?
That's brand new. Yeah, one of the things that bothered me about Midnight Mass again is some of the people on that island or town or whatever, their motivations just did not make sense. And that bothered me. And I think the other aspect that kind of bothered me too was the religiosity or the weird interpretation of some of the religious aspects of the series.
Yeah, it was very try-hardy. Yeah, it had I tried really that's my thing with Mike Flanagan though, is that he's wonderful when he's telling other people. I think he's a wonderful director. I think he's an incredibly talented director. With what he did with Dr. Sleep, what he's done with Gerald's Game, what he did with he's done other films like Oculus and Hush before Netflix, and like really great. Like his early filmography is really great. His directing in Haunting of Hill House, especially that long take, episode in episode 6. I mean, technically proficient, talented person.
Yes, absolutely.
As a writer, I do think he gets treacly and generic sometimes. I think it's very like do you ever know someone who makes really obvious statements that they obviously feel are very controversial, but like everybody knows it? You know what I mean? Like he's kind of like that. They're not controversial. It's something it's like common knowledge. I feel like sometimes he'll like that's my issue with House of Usher. Like I'm watching this and it's like sometimes rich people don't have morals. Like they can do wild things sometimes, and you may want to sit down for this, but pharmaceutical companies sometimes don't have our best interest. Mind blown. Like it's it's not saying anything. Like he doesn't manage to be on the edge that he wants to be all the time. So I
wonder too, you talked about Netflix deal. I wonder too, because House of Usher to me seems like the story was super rushed.
Yeah.
Or they're trying too hard to be edgy.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons that I stopped at the nightclub scene, because the acid and all that stuff. And again, getting into character motivations, there's a whole bunch of that stuff in there. It's like, really?
And you can see the actors trying their best with it, right? Like the actor who plays Perry, the young, I think he's a pretty good actor. I mean, I liked what he was. You could see him trying to bring more, than what was written on paper. Yeah, for sure. My family and I were watching it. We were just like, there's a scene there's a scene in that episode where, I don't know, like security guard or something, and they're watching like a whole room of panels of the different angles, of different camera angles that they've managed to set up in this factory. And it's like this really far-fetched situation. And there's just a bunch of people, like these bunch of
Doing
people,
stuff, right?
they're having sex, they're dancing, naked and all this other stuff. And like, there's just massive panels of scene after scene after scene. And I'm like,
Yeah.
how do you put that on your IMDb? I was the third scene, the third screen from the left on the top. I was like there was like a foursome there, and I'm in that. Like how do you?
Yeah.
It was this massive, and I understand the whole point of it. I'm being facetious right now.
Sure,
I'm not criticizing it or anything like that. It was obviously to show the excesses or what have you. I super get
Right.
it, but it was
Yeah.
very ham-fisted for me. It
But
was a little
yeah,
ham-fisted.
again, it was like, they were trying too hard. It was over the top. And I'm like, the Haunting of Hill House was so sublime and so intricately told. Each episode is like, oh my God, I want to see more. I want to see what happens with for me, House of Usher was like, was constantly checking my watch. Is it over yet? So it's unfortunate.
And I think it's because Mike Flanagan, I really do believe that it's because he directed the entirety of the scene of Haunting of Hill House. Or I don't think he directed every episode of anything else he's done. Maybe Midnight Mass. Maybe he might have directed every. I know that part for me, why Bly Manor had such a sharp drop off at midway is it was written by like 7 or 8 different people, or maybe more. I think it was like 10 different writers and all, and each person was responsible for an episode, and he was barely involved in it, and they just sort of had this. It really looked and felt like a film, a show that was directed and written by not a cohesive story.
Sure.
And there is those pacing issues, when you don't have one person. I mean, there's part of the writer strike was this whole auteur idea. They were debating about whether it's a good idea to have one person direct everything and write everything. Like, that's a controversial topic in Hollywood right now, because sometimes that can give people too much power, or it can be short-sighted. It prevents people from moving up in the ranks as a writer. And so there's some pros and cons to doing it the way that, but for that show, it just was like watching a 10-hour long film. It was one cohesive whole, whereas everything else subsequently. Have you seen Midnight Club, the one about the kids with cancer?
No.
Did you watch that one? Yeah.
No.
Yeah, it's definitely for like outside our demographic. It was definitely for teenagers, I sometimes I watch things and I'm just like, this is not intended for me, and that's okay. This was definitely one of those instances, but for what it was, I thought it was really good. I thought it was very cohesive in a way that like other stuff hasn't been. But
interesting. You mentioned the writer's strike, and then Marvel just announced that they're going back to having a writer's room and having a showrunner and doing things the way they used to do,
right?
Which I think is fantastic. I think having a cohesive vision, whether it's one small group or one person taking charge of that narrative,
yes,
I think I think that's probably the best way of approaching it. It hasn't worked, giving too many people the executive decision to make or break a story. Right. hardly ever works. Doing movies in a committee, and I know it's a group effort, but a movie, a director, a main writer, a showrunner has to have that pull to be able to make that decision to really stick to their guns when it comes to their original vision.
For sure. And that is how new writers, they become part of the writer's room, and then they make their mark there, and then they can be showrunner next time. That's how it happens. So when you have situations like Haunting of Hill House, it's not necessarily the best thing for the craft or the industry, because you have one person directing and writing everything, and there are really good reasons for wanting that traditional writer's room that they're going back to, I think.
Yeah. And I'm glad they're doing it. I'm hoping Star Wars will get on the same train, because we've had issues as well.
I'm behind on some of the Star Wars, but I've heard through the grapevine that we're both on,
Yeah, right. Too funny, too funny. Last question of the evening, Andy. Who is your favorite horror movie character
Oh, wow. That is an
from
awesome like, of all time?
of all time?
Oh, wow, that is so hard. That is such a hard question because 'cause there's been so many amazing ones.
Yeah.
Off the top of my head, I think would probably be Sydney. Sydney Prescott from the Scream trilogy from the
Okay.
Scream franchise, because she is just like just the iconic final girl. I know that Jamie Lee Curtis as well, but
Sure.
I love Sydney. I mean, we're more or less, I think, about the same age, and I just kind of grew up with her, and I've always just found her really relatable and real and flawed,
Mhm.
and just a very three-dimensional character. You really understand all her motives, and she's such a singular presence in those films. Although I did like the sixth one that didn't have her. I think as long
Yeah.
as Gail is there, the Courtney Cox character is there. But
Sure.
Neve Campbell and I mean, she's just an icon, a
Sure.
modern
Yeah.
horror icon, and
Absolutely.
if I had to pick, I'd probably pick her. So.
Very good choice. Very good
How
choice.
about
And
you? Are you going to tell us yours?
yes, no, I think my favorite horror movie character is going to be Freddy Krueger.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think he's got such a tragic backstory, and the powers that he manifests are really, really creepy, and
They're
such.
inescapable. Like, how can you
Yes,
escape your
right.
own dreams?
Exactly. And I think it's been a great journey for him, his character. And obviously Richard Englund, the actor, from his days as Willie on V, the series.
Which I watched as a child too. Did you see that when
Yeah.
I was a
Oh yeah,
little kid?
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And
It's
then
funny, I've met him. I've met him at conventions. He's the
sure, yeah.
nicest guy, and
He is.
he loves the body of work that, he loves. He's one of those people that was a serious actor and has had to contend with being this iconic, genre character, and he's very gracious about it, and he's just again, the chillest, friendliest person. So
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he loves the fans. I've heard the same thing.
yeah, he
Absolutely.
does. Yeah, that's fun for us. So
Excellent. Andy, thank you so much. Happy
thank
Halloween
you.
to the
Happy
chat
Halloween.
and to everyone that is watching and watching the replay. Thank you so much. Andy, why don't you tell folks where people can find you to say hello there?
Yeah, for sure. I love meeting new fans and new friends and new fans of the same stuff that a fan of. And I'm not as active on Twitter as I used to be, but I'm still on Twitter, on Instagram, on TikTok recently. I'm at plus verb, so like plus VERB, and that's pretty much my handle everywhere. So please do say hi, and we can talk horror or fantasy or sci-fi or whatever you want.
Excellent, excellent. And come back to the Scarif Scuttlebutt podcast anytime. You are welcomed. You have an open door policy here. So
I'll be sure that. Thank you guys.
excellent.
Thank you.
And Chad, thank you so much for hanging out with us here on this wonderful evening Halloween, where whatever the weather is in your neck of the woods. Thanks for hanging out, and I hope you guys got lots of candy and lots of scary stuff. Until next time, we'll catch you guys later. And that's the Scuttlebutt.